Lately, I've been getting a lot of questions about crypto. Most of my videos, actually all of my videos to date, have really focused on stocks and how to trade stocks. And so I get a lot of questions or comments on, things like, well, do you trade crypto also? So that's what this video is going to be about, specifically on Bitcoin. And so if that sounds interesting, stick around and we'll see you after the intro. All right, so like I mentioned, this video is going to be really focused on Bitcoin, how to trade it. And so just before I get into too much of the details of it, I wanted to kind of step back and give some of my thoughts on Bitcoin overall. So I do have both a long-term and a short-term view of, I'll say Bitcoin or crypto in general. So for my long-term, I do own actual Bitcoin, that I purchased through Coinbase. Here where I am in New York, we're pretty limited to how we can buy or sell crypto. So I use Coinbase to buy my Bitcoin and then moved it over to a wallet where basically I'm just holding it for the long term. So be that 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, we'll see how it plays out. But it's something that I'm not planning on touching anytime in the near future. In addition to that, I do like to take advantage, obviously, of some of the short-term moves that we've been seeing in Bitcoin, but for that, I typically don't buy the actual asset itself, mostly just because of the ease of buying an ETF. Now that we have the ETFs, the ease of trading it. I'm already in my stock account, so I'm already in my Thinkorswim account. It's just easier to make that purchase of, say, something like IBIT. It's more cost effective. The fees are obviously, if you compare the free purchases on something like Thinkorswim compared to the fees you got to pay on Coinbase. Now you can argue that, sure, you're paying a fee to the ETF when you buy it, but typically I'm in there just for short-term trades. So the fees don't add up to a lot on the ETF itself. And just the ease of being able to trade it quickly, sometimes even intraday, without any fees compared to, buying the actual asset on Coinbase. It's just what I prefer for my short-term stuff. So because of that, I'm going to show you a couple different charts. I'm going to show you the actual Bitcoin chart, which regardless of how you're doing this, I would suggest you look at the actual Bitcoin chart. And I'll show you that here towards the end of the video on why that is. But for the Bitcoin chart, I use TradingView. And this is just the free version. I don't have a subscription or anything. For what I use it for, this is more than adequate. And again, I do all my trading in Thinkorswim, so I use the charting platform there for everything else. But I do come here just for Bitcoin, and then obviously when I trade, the short-term trades like IBIT, I just do that through my Thinkorswim account. So if you're watching this video, I mean, I'm sure you're here because you want to know, well, should I buy a Bitcoin? Should I buy it? Should I sell it? Hold it? What's the next move in Bitcoin going to be? Well, nobody can predict the future, obviously, but let's do some technical analysis on the chart and see what we can figure out from there. So if we start by zooming out, Bitcoin has had a massive run from around the $16,000 level. I forget exactly where the bottom was. Um, all the way up to like around 73, almost to 74,000. So it's had this massive run, and now it's pretty much just consolidating or trading sideways. Now you may be saying, well, I mean, 53,000 to 73,000 is a pretty big pullback. That doesn't sound like trading sideways, but that's just because of the volatility of Bitcoin or crypto assets in general. I mean, when you compare 16,000 to 73, this pullback of 53 is actually relatively small. And if we focus in on this area here, let's just look at, see exactly what's going on here. If we draw some trend lines, we can connect these peaks. And if we do the same thing on the bottom, we can see that it really just is trading in this sideways to slightly downward wedge. And really that's a great consolidation pattern after a big move like this. It actually is something that you do want to see, as boring or as difficult as it is to trade while it's inside this wedge. This is actually very healthy price action after a large move like this. So you might be saying, well, okay, so while it's in this wedge, what do I do? Do I buy, hold, sell? Well, if you're in from lower, I would definitely say just hold it at this point. My views are, again, in the long term, be it 1 year or 5 or 10 years from now, I really believe that Bitcoin will be at higher prices. So if you're in it for the long term, I would just say hold it. I wouldn't even look at this. This is just noise if you're a long-term investor. Now, if you're trying to trade this for the short term and get some, take advantage of these short-term moves, this really is not, not the right time to be buying. So what is today, July 22nd, that we're making this video. I really wouldn't recommend buying at this level. And the main reason for that is, I mean, obviously you can see it is very close to, but just below this top trend line. So it's actually in a really good spot to pull back. And, so sure, you might get a little more, it might get to, what is that, almost 71,000, but it might pull back from here also. So this level is really not a good entry level. I'm actually considering just trimming some of my IBIT, and I'll show you that when we get to the Thinkorswim chart. But I got into IBIT closer down to these lows, and I was considering just taking some profits today just because of some of the weakness in the crypto market. But we'll see how the day plays out. But really, if you wanna get into this for a more shorter term view, what you want to see is you either want to see a pullback either to one of these moving averages. So the red is the 50-day moving average, the blue is the 21. What you'd like to see is maybe a little bit of a pullback. Say it pulls back to the 50-day. By that time, the 21 kind of catches up. And if you see a bounce off there, if you see some strength coming in off the 50-day moving average, that would be a possible buy point. If it pulls back, all the way down, say to the about $56,000 level, or even if it pulls back all the way down to the trend line, as long as it doesn't break this trend line, that would be another place to potentially buy. But then again, you would want to put your stop right below the trend line, and if it does continue to break down, you'd want to make sure you get out of it. Or if you just want to be conservative, just to do nothing. Sometimes just sitting on your hands is the best approach, and really you want to see a break of this trend line. That would indicate the next move higher, and that could be a great entry point. Now, even though you'd be getting in at a higher dollar amount than if you were to buy somewhere within the wedge, it is a safer trade, or a more I guess more predictable or more high probability trade if you wait for the breakout. So again, you either want to wait for a pullback down to support, get in at a nice low entry with a tight stop, or just wait for the breakout if you're looking for something short term. Now, one last thing I want to show on this chart before we go over to Thinkorswim. I just want to zoom out, and here I'll adjust my scale a little. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the overall view of Bitcoin, really crypto in general, but obviously we're focusing on Bitcoin in this video, and kind of why I say I'm bullish for the long term. Other than all of the other news type events, just looking at the chart, why am I bullish? So you can see I've been trading Bitcoin for quite some time with all the trend lines I have drawn on here. And when you first look at this, I've heard quite a few or seen quite a few videos, or heard quite a bit of commentary in the recent days, or in the last couple months, that it looks like we're at a double top or a triple top. And basically this is the resistance level, even though we slightly broke above it, and we're going to get a big pullback down. Now, while it's always possible that something like that could happen, I mean, you never know. Something can happen in the news, some new regulation could come out. You can never predict what will happen. It's always a possibility. The reason I don't think it's a very high likelihood possibility is, to me, this doesn't look so much as a double top or a triple top as it does a cup and handle. And let me explain why that is. When you can see what happened here last time. So this is a typical double top pattern, and what it is that you'll have one high, you get a pullback, and now people thought this was a cup. Okay, this does not look like a cup and handle to me. This one does. The reason is this was a very sharp pullback, a very steep ascend, and it slightly took out the previous high, but then it made a double top very quickly. So double tops typically occur within a few days, or maybe within a few weeks at most. You get this fairly quick retest of the high, and again, sometimes even breaking out to a new high and then reversing, just to try and, I guess, trick the traders, trick the dumb money into buying. A lot of times double tops do slightly exceed their previous high and then instantly reverse. So you get this really short, over a few days or over a couple week pattern, makes a double top, and then makes a steep pullback. Now, that's not what's happening in this case. Now, okay, you can say, this part was really steep, but when you zoom out and look at this overall, pattern, it really is kind of gradual. It's not as steep as this one, where in a matter of just a couple days, you're down a lot. to 30, all the way down to 30,000 from 65,000. It is more of a gradual pattern. It did spend a fair bit of time near the bottom, and then it was a gradual increase up. And now you didn't have this quick turnaround like we did back here, where it made a high, pull back. It never exceeded that high. It never even quite came back to that high, came close to it, but it never gave the sharp pullback. And it keeps testing this high and this trend line. So to me, this looks like a handle. So I would be more inclined to say is that we're building a cup and handle pattern, ultimately thinking that this will break to the upside and continue from there. Now, again, like I said, anything can happen because you never know what will happen in news events or just with the technology itself. But this is just something I'm watching, and I wouldn't trade it as a cup and handle until it confirms itself. And again, that confirmation would be a break of this top trend line. But that is what it's kind of looking like to me. Just as a side note, also, if you go back and look at some of the halving events, obviously there was a lot of hype earlier this year about the Bitcoin halving. Usually it's 1 year after the halving when the stock really peaks. So that would put us in early next year, early 2025. So again, just a little more ammunition as to why I believe that we are still going to continue higher from this point. And if anyone's not familiar with cup and handle patterns, I mean they're fairly reliable. And what I like about them is they're easy to measure what the expected move is. So a cup and handle on a daily chart is a really easy pattern to trade. A cup and handle on a weekly chart or just over a long-term period like Bitcoin was is a very powerful signal. If this were to break out, basically what you do is you subtract the high and the low. So let's just use round numbers just for simple math. Let's say we use 70,000 as the high and we use 15,000 as the low. Again, just for round numbers, you can do the actual math yourself. That gives us a difference of $55,000. So then what you do is you add that $55,000 onto the breakout level, which we used 70,000, and that gives you $125,000 as your potential target. Now, it's interesting that that also lines up pretty closely with what some of the analysts have been expecting. For quite some time now, we've been hearing, Bitcoin's going to 100,000, and so that kind of lines up with that prediction also. So again, we'll see what happens. We'll see if we can get a breakout of this trend line. But my belief right now is that we are going higher in the long term, probably to that 100,000 or $125,000 level, and we'll just have to see how that plays out. All right, so one last thing I want to show you, if we go over to Thinkorswim and look at the IBIT chart. So again, IBIT is what I use for my short-term trading, just for ease. And I just want to show you what some of the differences are between this chart and the Bitcoin chart. Because like I mentioned, even if you're trading just IBIT, you still want to look at the Bitcoin chart because there are some differences and it will help your analysis. So obviously IBIT is a much shorter duration chart. IBIT only started trading back on January 11th. Prior to that, it didn't exist. So looking at Bitcoin does give you, more of that big picture type perspective of where it's going. But more importantly, as I'm sure you all know, Bitcoin trades 24/7. IBIT does not, or any other ETF does not. So there are going to be some minor differences when you do a technical analysis on IBIT versus the actual Bitcoin chart. And to show that, let's draw the trend lines that we drew, on Bitcoin. And the top one actually lines up fairly well. But the issue that you wouldn't have noticed if you're only trading IBIT is on the bottom trend line. So if you remember, actually, let's just go back to the chart real quick. So looking into this area, we've had 3 times already. I mean, you can almost say this was a fourth time or a fifth time, but we've had 3 times where we've solidly touched this bottom trend line, the last of which being on Friday, July 5th. But the problem is, if we look at IBIT, that didn't happen. On July 5th, we didn't come near this trend line. And actually the 6th was even lower than on the 5th. And so you'll find discrepancies like this between IBIT and the Bitcoin chart. And again, the reason for that is simply because IBIT doesn't trade 24/7. So looking at this, what must have happened was Bitcoin at some point after hours pulled back, touched its bottom trend line, and then bounced prior to the market opening. And that's why we never saw this on this chart. So if you're looking only at the IBIT chart, this signal here would have been a lot more bullish than if you were looking at the actual Bitcoin chart. Now, regardless, either way, I think I mentioned already, I did end up buying some IBIT just for this short-term trade. I believe I bought it on this day here, and that's mostly because I like to buy strength, not weakness. So even though Bitcoin had touched its bottom trend line, and here it hadn't, we were still getting red candles, So there was a little bit of a bounce here, but then we actually made a lower low on this day before bouncing only to about even. So it really wasn't there's no clear buy signal, I guess, in these two candles here. But what you like to see is a pullback and then a bounce with a green candle taking out the previous day's high, and that's what I'll use for for an entry, and then place my stop right at that previous day low of around 31.13, and see if you can ride some kind of short-term gain that way. So I've been in this now for several days. Depending on how today turns out, actually we are, as I'm doing this video, we're getting a little bit of a bounce. We were a little lower when I first started this video. And that's when I was saying that I was considering, possibly taking some profits off of this trade and then just letting the rest run and see, are we going to get a little bit of a rollover, maybe a pullback, to these moving averages, or is this really going to continue higher and ultimately break out of that trend line? If we do get a little more of a pop, say closer to that trend line, and it looks like we start seeing some weakness there, I would definitely look at taking some profits, either in addition to here, or definitely if you haven't taken any here, that trend line would be a place to take some profits. And then if we get a breakout from there, you could always add it back. But if we do get a pullback from this trend line, again, down to the moving averages, maybe half of this move, worst case, all the way back down to the trend line. But then you'd have a better opportunity to re-add to your position. So going back to the initial question, do we buy, hold, or sell at this point? Again, looking at these charts, it's definitely not a buy point at these levels. If you're already in, hold, or maybe take some partial profits, hold the rest. I wouldn't sell it all here, but only if you have a good cushion. If you gotten in earlier and you got a good cushion, continue to hold. But I definitely would not take a new position at this level. Your entry points, your two optional entry points would be either a breakout above the trend line or a pullback either to the moving averages or the bottom trend line. But wait for a signal, wait for a green candle that takes out the high of the previous day. That would be your buy signal, which I guess you can make the argument, this is a buy signal here, because we had a move up, a short, 3-day consolidation, and then this took out the previous high, actually on really good volume also. So we'll see what happens. This is actually a pretty good buy signal. Maybe we do get a little bit more of a run out of that, but again, I wouldn't buy it here. It's just a high risk trade at this point. Crypto is all crypto, Bitcoin. They're very susceptible to news events. So I believe this day here, or maybe it was this one, I forget exactly which day it was on, where when Trump announced his VP pick. So now you got both of them are very pro crypto. And that's where we got this jump in price. So again, crypto and Bitcoin very sensitive to things in the news, very sensitive to political events. So it is something I keep track of. But that being said, the chart is my source of truth. So that's your tip of the day, I guess, is that don't trade based off of news. I always say this to people that are just getting into trading. Doesn't matter if it's stocks or crypto or whatever it is. You don't have an advantage by following the news, because if you think that us general retail traders, by the time we hear the news, it's the hedge funds, the big money, the smart money, whatever you want to call them, they already know. I mean, we have no edge news wise on any stock or crypto or anything else. It's we only find out once it's public knowledge, and I can guarantee to you the experts knew at least at least an hour before, if not several days prior to us hearing the news. So I keep up with the news just to kind of understand the trends and stuff like that. But really, the chart is your one source of truth. The market is always right, regardless of what the news is saying, regardless of what you believe is happening or should be happening. The market is always right, and if you want to make money in the market, following the chart, following the money is the best way to do that. That's really all I got for this video. Hopefully that was helpful and gives you some perspective on where we think Bitcoin or just crypto in general is headed. If you enjoyed this video and if you're enjoying this content, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It does help us out to generate more content, and it also gets our video out to a larger distribution, to a larger group every time you hit that like button. So please go ahead and hit those like and subscribe buttons, and we'll see you next time.